get started. Where's
Sarah, just wait 1 second for Sarah. She just went to grab it.
There you go. All right. Calling to order this special meeting of the Albany Unified School District Board of Education. This is a special work-study session for looking at the school plans for student achievement elementary level. May I have a roll call?
President Trutain,
Here.
Vice President Doss, Trustee Clark,
Here?
Trustee Hinckley,
Here.
Trustee Duran.
Here. Okay, so we will move down to our table for the work study. Superintendent, would you like to start the work study?
Thank you, everyone, for being here. I really appreciate the work that our elementary principals have done to put together what I think are very well-written, outstanding single plans for student achievement. As you know, that these are the plans that the school basically uses to run to make sure that our students are academically and socially successful. With that, I'm going to turn it over to our Assistant Superintendent of Educational Services, Marie Williams.
Thank you very much, Superintendent Williams, and thank you all for being here. Thank you, principals, for being here to present your SIPSAs. This evening, as in years past, the structure of our conversation of the single plans really centers around 3 questions.
I'm sorry, did we need to approve this agenda?
Yes, you can do that here.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
A second?
All in favor of approving the agenda? Aye. Thank you. Sorry for the interruption.
No problem, thank you. So our conversation this evening will center around 3 questions that we ask every year. The first question is, how well did we do implementing this year's plan? The second question is, how do we know if we were successful or not successful? The third question asks, how has this knowledge influenced your plans for next year? So you'll notice I've popped in front of you just a little guide for 2 reasons. The first is that we don't have a lot of time to talk about these single plans this evening, and I want to make sure that we are able to talk about each of the site's plans and also sort of be able to share and highlight the successes, speak to sort of the data, the metrics, the observable outcomes, and then also finish the conversation with looking ahead to what you can expect in next year's single plans. So these are not the only questions you may ask, but certainly I thought they might be helpful for us in guiding the conversation. Principals, you are invited to use these questions as you're sharing. Board members, you're invited to use these questions also. The one thing that I will do this evening, to the best of my ability, is keep us on time. And so you'll see sort of some time estimates outlined here on the left, and I will be the official timekeeper for our work study session this evening. So the other thing I'll say is that what we have found to be most successful in facilitating these conversations is to take 1 question at a time and then have each site share and then take questions, rather than have a site answer all 3 questions and then we sort of get really into that site's plan and then maybe don't have enough time for the other sites. So I will try to help us share the time also between the 3 sites in the time that we have. So with that, our first question, how well did we do implementing this year's plan? I'm going to pass the microphone to my left and invite Heather Duncan, the principal of Cornell Elementary, as she is closest to me, to begin our conversation. Thank you.
Thank Thank you. Well, I think, as I'm thinking about some of the greatest successes this year, and I wrote a bit about that, I'm really, and I think we'll all talk a little bit about reading implementation with units of study, because I think we've had the opportunity over the last several years to have coaches at our sites. We've had coordination among the principals and training as we've taken on a lot of new curriculum. The challenge in that, of course, is it's a lot for teachers to do, and they've had to keep up with all of it. But with that said, I think we've been pretty methodical and oriented towards spreading it out over time, and then giving people various ways to access that. So it might be individual coaching, it might be district-wide training, it might be grade level meetings. I think that we come at it from a multifaceted approach, in the way that we support professional development. Also, in that way this year, we had an overarching focus in the district about working on culturally responsive teaching and really upping the ante a little bit about how we're thinking about equity-based practice. At Cornell, I've always felt that teachers are generally willing to step up and do a little bit more. And we had a little mini kind of power group. Each year we have a focus, and this year we were working on this, where we had a team meeting quite a bit at the beginning of the year. I think we met weekly, and then it's winding down to, I think the last time we met was maybe 5 weeks ago. But planning around ways that we could kind of team with the district training and then add additional things that were sort of specific to our site. Lastly, I think over the course of 5 years at Cornell, we've been working on intervention and how to improve the way in which we provide intervention, the way that we team around reviewing data, the way that we meet with teachers, and then what do we do about it. And I think my experience over 25 years has been that intervention can sometimes be like little islands where you've got a math teacher and a reading teacher, and they almost don't overlap with each other. But I would say at Cornell, we've really evolved into a system where everybody meets with everybody. The challenges around that, mostly, I would say, are trying to fit everything in during the day. We have short days here, shorter day than I've ever had in any district I've been in instructionally, and yet I think we're providing some of the most rigorous interventions and programs. The question about what our greatest challenge was this year by far was staffing. We had a couple of positions that were barely filled all year long. We had substitutes, we had people quitting and coming and leaving, and to some degree that could have been better supported at the district level, but I want to say that mostly it's because we just don't have people to apply for some of these jobs, and so then we just float them out all year and we don't have anybody. The impact of that on the kids, their learning, the office staff, and everybody trying to figure out who's going to be in that position every day when someone doesn't show up, and we shared some of that load with music, it's just tremendously stressful. So that was probably our biggest challenge. I don't know how long I have. Keep it moving. Let's move on. Got to cut a time. I could stay on that for a while.
No, I get you for sure. So feel free to cut me off. Absolutely. So at Marin, I feel like we've had a great year this year. Some successes that I want to focus on are shifting practice. What Heather talked about in terms of taking on the new curriculum and with reading and writing. That was a big project, and I just want to take a step back and recognize that last year Marin only had a TSA 1 day a week, which we really we got through with support from our friends. Absolutely, yeah, and and we made it through, and it was all right. But boy, has it been different this year in terms of shifting teacher practice and teacher focus and coaching, because it's the daily support when you have someone in that filling that role full time. Boy, it just felt so great this year to be able to provide teachers with the support that they needed in order to make the changes that we were asking them to make. Kind of huge for me to watch this happen. I remember starting as a teacher at Marin and being handed the coveted binder of handwritten notes that retired teachers had written, and that was our curriculum. We didn't have a process at that time for adopting curriculum, and we've had a very rigorous process in these last several years, thanks to some significant support. But it's a shift in thinking about, a teacher's role and a way that teachers provide their instruction and what exactly it is and what the importance of alignment is. And that's a success that I definitely want to celebrate at Marin, that we have taken on that challenge of becoming more aligned and taking on a more systematic approach to what we do. We still celebrate everybody's individual differences and certainly encourage teachers to be creative with their lessons and insert their passion, because that's the art. That's where the art happens, and that's really important. But it's just as important as being able to have some articulated language and goals and ways that we can measure student progress as kiddos move through our grade levels. An area that I feel like has been a big focus for us as well is in delivering math intervention during the day. We've really shifted our thinking at Marin around, again, going from a more individualized process where a teacher works with a paraprofessional or an hourly support person to provide, extra time with a student who needs, some more support, to having a more concrete foundation. It's been helpful to work with Cornell in terms of the learning about the systems that they've put in place and purchasing some of the materials that they've had as well, so for us to implement at Marin, so that again we can have more of a structured, aligned approach to meeting the needs of our students who are most in need. And that has been a really satisfying shift to watch happen. Not trying to say we've got it all figured out. We've still got some learning to do, and we're still working out the kinks, but looking forward to continuing to implement that next year. So could talk for a long time, but I probably need to pass. So yeah, absolutely.
I'm going to, at the risk of not repeating a lot of what was already said, I want to highlight maybe some unique places. And I think the first success that I think Ocean View can really celebrate is staying focused. We've had a very challenging year around distractions, around planning whether we'd be rebuilt, whether we wouldn't, where we would be, where we might not be. And I think that really offers an opportunity for a lot of distraction. And I was reminded several times, usually through my leadership team, that they wanted to stay focused on instruction. And that when I brought in issues of rebuilding or issues of temporary housing, they would give me about 5-10 minutes of attention, and then they would say, Terry, we need to get back to why we give up this time so that we can talk about student achievement and about our instructional needs. So I think that's probably one of the biggest successes that I took away myself, that you're not going to see written in a plan, is really the culture of the school and what I call the honesty that teachers require their leaders to have, and accountability. So I really appreciated being held to that standard. I do want to, though, at the risk of being redundant, also add that as a TSA, having that support and that solid teacher lens to instruction and to running a school. The challenges, and I'm kind of bouncing around, but the challenges were equally weighed out by having a TSA. The number of days that our TSAs had to sub partial day or whole day because we couldn't find subs prevented us from having to take classes and divide them up and put them in other classes, which is another way of addressing not having enough subs. I also have the luxury of having an office staff member who is also a credentialed emergency teacher. So if needed, I had the office personnel this year to where I could also put and replace them in that class. And what that does is it gives students continuity when there are emergencies or when there are times in which we need to pull teachers out. With the training that we did in our reading program, that kind of team support to classroom continuity kept our teachers focused on the adoption for reading, kept them in the workshops, kept them feeling like their kids were being taken care of by qualified people, and it kept them wanting to come to the next workshop. That was the thing my greatest fear was. They put in plans, sub doesn't show up or they don't have one, so then they have to go back into the room. So the next time they're asked to do it, do they then continue to plan and trust our process? And I was very pleased that throughout our district, I think our teachers trusted the process and continued with the great training that we offered them. I think the biggest challenge, again, I go back to where I started, and that had to do with rebuilding and getting through the conversations with the board, with the community, finding where we're going to be, how we're going to do it. And I feel like right now we're in a really good place. We're making solid plans. We have logistics in place, and we're kind of digging through the weeds on that. But I really do appreciate where we started and where we're at now. But I also want to take just a quick second. I brought two of my teachers here. Rebecca Springer, one of my third grade teachers, who really helped write our plan and helped. She has a unique interest and loves the idea of, and I don't think I'm taking any words out of her mouth, that she loves doing this work. She's come and done this work with me for several years, so I really appreciate her being here. I also thought it would be really good to have a TSA representative of our elementary schools. Rebecca Eros is here. She also helped work with the plan, and they can speak to any of this if you guys want to jump in.
Okay. Thank you, principals, for sharing. Board members, I would invite you if you have any questions or comments at this time. Now would be the time for that. Relative to the first question.
I'm concerned based on what... I have a concern that may be out of your hands, but that you all basically shared, which is how important additional support can be for your classroom teachers. And given our fiscal crises, do you have some plans, alternative or otherwise, financial or otherwise, that might speak to how you can continue to have teachers get the support that they need?
I'll throw out one conversation that I've had with my third, fourth, and fifth grade teachers. Given that we'll be on two campuses, a lot of our conversation has been around the loss of not just having a credentialed teacher who is not responsible for a group of students at any one time, like our TSA, and having an office staff member who can help pitch in when needed, and not having an administrator perhaps on campus during that moment of crisis or need. We've begun to talk about, how do we share students? How do your students become my students? How do we integrate that perhaps into supporting one another with as little disruption as possible? What does that look like? How do we need to plan for it? I think as individual as people are, some people have experience with it in the past and say, yeah, we've done that before and we can do it because I did it where I used to teach. And we have other people who've never experienced that and have never been asked to step outside their classroom and support other kids when their substitute doesn't show up. So I think there's varying degrees of comfort in the conversation, but it is a conversation that we're having. I wouldn't say it's a solid plan, but we recognize that our world will be a little different given, one, where we're at, two, the financial limitations our district will provide for us next year.
Just to add briefly to that, and I appreciate the question because it is a significant concern, I'd say, and putting systems in place, because we know that we're going to have to do more with less next year, given the cuts that are coming and the loss of our TSAs. But yeah, already having those conversations about how staff, what systems are in place, so that when we don't have subs coming in, what automatically happens. I think that it reminds me of, Terry, what you said about the construction piece at ILT with your staff. It similarly, I think we're going to have to get real focused on basics, and we're, and be acutely aware of
what needs to be done and do what needs to be done and identify what can be, it's prioritizing, I guess is what I want to say. It's about prioritizing. We're going to have to get real focused on what our priorities are as a school.
Do you want to add anything?
One of the big focuses for the TSAs this year has been to kind of think about what is it we're doing and trying to put systems in place, going from a multi-page list of things we do over the course of the year, and kind of, while it's really important and really useful, to be able to say, oh, someone's kid is sick, let me drop what I'm doing and go into your classroom. The bulk of what TSAs do is also very, very different. So going from making a list of what we do to kind of putting systems in place at site and district levels to kind of see who can take over some of that and, like Melissa said, like prioritize, because not everything's going to get done that we do. And so I think we've made really good progress in my 3 years as TSA, changing the conversations that we have district-wide around instruction. The reading and writing implementation and PD we've had have us using a common language. And I think while I'm relatively new to the district still, this is my 5th year here, kind of the way we talk about it site to site, things are much less isolated. And so I think we have a really good base to move forward. I know at Ocean View, and I'm sure at the other 2 sites, ILT has been talking around what pieces of my work are we going to take over and how is that going to get carried, so that we've had so much momentum over the last 3 years of new implementation. How do we keep that going? Whether it's, examining student work at grade level meetings, doing some things at cross-site. We've been talking to Marie about, kind of sketching out some PD for next year already, so we can kind of keep things aligned. But I think it's going to be a lot of prioritizing and deciding what do we keep and, what has to go by the wayside.
Thank you. I'm going to move us along to our next question, which gives us an opportunity to look a little bit at some of the data that has been included in the site plans. I do want to say this, that the data that you are looking at reflects students' performance on assessments in the last school year, 17-18. The conversations that principals have been having with you about what has been successful this year is in response to that data. And then currently students are taking Smarter Balanced assessments. And so before the end of the year, we'll have some preliminary information about sort of the fruit of the work that principals have been doing, right? So our second question is, how do we know if we were successful or not successful? And so again, I'll start with Heather. Thank you.
Yeah, well, I think everything that I talked about in terms of success is really about classroom teaching. So I think, not to say lightly, I think Cornell's dashboard looks really great this year. I was very proud of our progress. But I also think it's just a snapshot. We have to look at other pieces of data. In fact, we were just meeting today with ILT, again, kind of going in instructional leadership team. I call it leadership team, so every time I say ILT, I can't even remember what that means. But I think going back to the question of, what are we going to be doing about these things or these gaps in the future, I see it mostly as an opportunity to get people to be efficient and to think about how to combine efforts and get really good at everybody stepping into leadership and taking on everything that they possibly may have a talent in. And I think with that said, you can't necessarily think that we'll just do more with less, because more with less means less people doing more things, which usually means we have to cut some of the stuff out because we only have so much bandwidth. And I'm leading into, how do we know if this stuff is successful? How do we know what we're doing works, and then what will we do about it in the future? And today in leadership, we were just sitting and talking about all the ways that they pass on information to the teachers ahead of them. and how the coach has helped with that. And I've been working on them with them on this for about a month, realizing that we have to streamline. You know, they're passing, just for example, they're passing on a sheet that they handwrite all this stuff on and they stick it in a folder, but yet we have an online data spreadsheet. It doesn't make any sense to me. Why are we doing all of that? And so we spent the last few weeks realizing we're getting rid of all that hard copy stuff. And going to have some fidelity around entering the data online, which every once in a while, probably 3 or 4 people don't do it. And so then I'm tracking them down. And that's one of the things we've been trying to work on, is getting an acknowledgement and an insight on people's part when I say something to them like, you know, there won't be anybody to do this next year. And when a principal does it with you, it's going to be quick, efficient, in an email, and you'll just be told to do it. And so, you know, we've been trying to develop systems so everybody will have their part and it won't just kind of roll up to the site principal, because it's not practical. I think one of the ways that at Cornell we've known that some of this stuff has been successful, I think, would highlight the intervention team at Cornell, and that they meet every other week, and that probably as we began doing this a couple of years ago, I did the lion's share of the talking. I would set the agenda. I would be leading the meeting. Now I sit back and they tell me what to do, and that's exactly what you need to see start happening in a school, is you're there to help them, but they're the ones leading the work. Because what if the principal's in a meeting next year because there is no coach and she has to get up and leave and walk out? And so you really want to systematize some of these things so that everybody takes a part. And I think why we've seen some of the success we've seen at Cornell is everybody's just working their tail off, and they're trying to be coordinated. So we're trying not to have isolated conversations, so that one person's working on something over here and the other person didn't even know, and if they had just teamed up, it would have been a lot better for the kids. So I think I'm talking about that generically, but that's where I think we've had our biggest success at Cornell, is around teaming and getting everybody on the same page. That's all I have to say.
All right, so to take it from there, how do we know if we were successful or not successful at Marin? I think we were definitely successful. Our dashboard shows that our students are very high performing. Of course, there are fluctuations, and I certainly want to acknowledge that there are subgroups and an achievement gap that we are continuing to focus on. That is important work that we value at Marin, absolutely, and what we are using to try to close some of those achievement gaps is expanding our culturally responsive teaching practices. This is something that we've valued at Marin, you know, for quite some time, making sure that every child feels that they have a place in the classroom, making sure that every child has an opportunity to share their background, their beliefs, their culture, their differences, whatever they may be, and continuing to sharpen our lens and focus our efforts and becoming more systematized and efficient about how we do that, I think is going to be really important in closing those achievement gaps for our students. Part of what we are hoping to do by refining our math intervention program especially is use data to help inform what we're approaching and why, and the materials that we've purchased this year are definitely supporting that work. I think that's one of the questions on here was about what we don't see, I believe. Yeah, in some of the dashboard data, you know, I just want to remind everybody that what you see on the dashboard are test results from 3rd through 5th graders. And our kindergartners and our 1st graders and our 2nd graders are working real hard too. And it is important, I believe, to all of us to be able to monitor their progress, because we're firm believers in early intervention. We know that the sooner we catch deficiencies or gaps in understanding, the more successful our students, the better shot our students have. And so while our site plans focus on the dashboard and what the state has, and I recognize the importance of that, my hope is in continuing this work that we can further refine our alignment with our local assessments, which is part of why I think it's such a big deal that this shift is happening in teaching at Marin, so that we can hone in even more on our students who aren't achieving as well as we'd like them to, and in order to ensure that everyone reaches their full potential. So yeah.
I think across the district, not just the elementaries, I think we all recognize that our dashboards are something that we can be quite proud of. Whether we are above the state or into the green, and now the way the new dashboard reads, or into the blue for all of our students. I think particularly for us, recognizing how many languages and how often our students move, I think our math scores are really quite remarkable. Recognizing how language-based our math is, I still think our math scores overall are really quite remarkable. So that's one of the things that I think some of the data shows. I think also if you dig into some of the data, you'll notice how much in our community that students feel that they're a part of our community, how they feel like they have a voice in our community. As a matter of fact, having Rebecca Springer here reminds me that she's integral, and she's even presented at the board and provided information for me to present to the board around the way in which the social emotional standards and our social justice standards we implement into regular assemblies. She's a big part in student leadership. We have student leadership opportunities for students 1st grade through 5th grade. We've rescheduled our prep schedule so that Rebecca in 3rd grade, a 4th grade teacher, and a 5th grade teacher have a common prep 1 day a week, where 1 day a month they can meet with all those kids. Those children are given responsibilities to go back to the classroom, to share out to their class. They're given the opportunity to grab questions and bring information back, which has been a really good tool for us moving forward, getting information from kids around what do they want in a temporary school, what questions do they have, what concerns do they have. So that communication piece, I think, is something that you're not going to find. I think some of these questions ask about what you won't find in the data. But those are some of the things that kind of help keep a community together that I think are successes that show up in other parts of the data. So when your math scores are strong, when your language arts scores are strong, what that tells me is that our kids feel safe, welcomed, and that they can focus on learning when it's time to get back into the classroom. If you've been at an elementary school site and you watch kids go from recess to the classroom in a dysregulated class or in a classroom where students don't feel that way, you're going to see a teacher take anywhere from 5 to 25 minutes to resettle a class so that they can get started up again. The majority of our classes, you're not going to find that kind of transitional challenge. You're going to see most teachers get right into their teaching within 5 minutes, maybe with an occasional conference with students. So those are some of the things that I think you're going to see in scores, but the data behind it really is how the culture of the school keeps kids supported so they can keep learning.
Oh, I'll add to that. Please. Mention my name. I'm going to jump in. Thank you. I totally agree, and leadership really is a huge part. And we have student council members from the 1st grade through 5th grade. Plus, we have community coaches and conflict managers, and then we have our 5th grade leadership. And our students run our assemblies. And in the last best behavior assembly, where we were looking at academic standards, like working with precision and sorry, I've been well all year, and this is just killing me at the end. There were 75 students who participated in making videos and performing and talking to the staff. And I have kids stopping me in the hallway. This is our 2nd year of doing a full student council where we meet every month and they do the reporting and they're sharing in class. And they're having monthly conversations about things that we're focusing on, whether they're behavior or academic, or how we're all feeling and what our ideas are for what's going to happen to our community next year. And I found that I see them very empowered and taking leadership and speaking more proudly. And my opinion pieces this year are so strong and beautiful, and the kids are thoughtful and engaged. And of course, I am on site council, and I have been for the last 8 years. And looking at the dashboard, which I really like because it seems a lot more easy to understand this time. And I am really proud of the scores, but when you do break them down and you're looking for holes, it does seem that these are for Ocean View, as I haven't seen anybody else's, for Ocean View, that the communities where we are groups of students who aren't showing the same level of success are our students who could be said that are not as attached to their classroom, their community, or their parents are students and they're working, or they've only been here 6 months, or they know they're leaving. And so we have that extra challenge of gaining their trust, proving to them that this is worth doing. What we do is very rigorous, and showing that that is exciting and makes the day go by fast. It takes a lot of energy, but I think the payoff has been really huge. And some days I'm like, oh my God, I just want my prep. I don't want to lead another meeting with 60 kids. And then afterwards, Sherry's like, how'd it go? And I'm like, it was terrific. That was the best time. You wouldn't believe what they asked me, blah, 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 blah. And then I remember why we're here and what we're doing and what they're capable of, and that we can keep asking them to do more. And it's been exciting, and I am scared to death about next year. I have no, oh my goodness, it's overwhelming. I'm trying not to think about it because there's so much to do in the next 4 weeks. But I know we can do it, but it's going to have to be just like Heather said. We're going to have to prioritize. It's like Rebecca said, we have to already set our protocols up. ILT is already working on what we're going to be discussing next year. And we've started a book talk. We're doing a book called Onward, Teaching Resiliency in Teachers. And it's been an amazing way again, to draw us together, because this has been very divisive. We're being sent to all kinds of different sites with different kids, and kids are coming and going, and really important people in our community are retiring, and trying to hold on to all those pieces when we can't. We've got to now decide, what are we going to let go of, and how much can we do to get ready, and how much of it's just going to be, this is what's going to, this is what happens. So it's exciting and terrifying, but our kids can do it. They're pretty amazing.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. I would invite the board at this time, if you have any questions or observations. I will send the microphones both ways.
So I have a few questions. If we had just like all this money, we were like, give us some ideas of things that you would do if money wasn't an option. Would that kind of change some of the thinking into the things that you guys are doing?
No. It wouldn't change our priorities. Not to me, it wouldn't.
I think the priorities definitely would stay the same. I think that the way that we implement what we do and how we support one another, to me, that's the difference. Our priorities are on teaching and learning and providing a safe place for every child in our school. But the loss of TSAs next year is significant. I don't know, if you're saying that money's not an object, then I'm saying let's bring our TSAs back. But I know that that's, I appreciate the question, but I know that that's not possible. So we are moving forward in a way that makes it possible to, still maintain our priorities without them. But I will definitely miss my TSA, so.
I guess I would say that I have a different answer to that, and the answer is yes, my priorities would be the same, but you simply, when you're cutting a budget at your house, and that's how I think of it, and you're getting down to the point where you only have enough money for food, then all you're thinking about is food, shelter, and clothing. But when you add money to your budget and you have discretionary income, other things happen in a home budget when you have discretionary income. And so, yes, things would change if we had more money. Money brings people. People do work. And so, do our priorities change? Of course we're still going to work on helping kids with teaching and learning. Of course we're going to help them get the interventions they need in the culture of the responsive teaching. But with more people, because mostly in a school district, the money translates to staff. And we don't have the people to get all these things done. And so absolutely there will be some important things shaved. I don't want to be the person who says things like that, because because I'm optimistic and I think we can do a lot with very little. But things have to go when we don't have money. And it does change. That is one of the reasons why the kids in California are not doing as well as they are in other states. There is no way around that. We have achievement gaps, yes, but we also have a lack of resources. So I think we're preaching to the choir here. But yes, I absolutely believe things would be different if we had more money.
Yeah, so like the reason why I asked that question is not to like, it wasn't a trick question or trip you guys up or anything like that.
You're not telling us about it.
I wish. It's just like some like when I go and have like different meetings with people, you know, they always ask me like, you know, we all go and like advocate for money. But for example, I was talking to a representative from Buffy Wicks's office, and he asked me, well, what would you do if you had, that's where that question came from, because earlier today he said, well, if you had more money, what would you do with it? And so, I mean, I had some answers for him, but it was interesting to kind of hear what you guys were saying, so I'll add that to my email response to him. And the only other question I had was, it sounds like you guys have a lot of good ideas and a lot of good things that are happening. Is there anything that you're implementing now that is going to go forward that's different from what you guys were doing last year? Like you recognized like this was working, so we're going to do this, or this wasn't working, so now we're...
It feels like a good transition, maybe, huh? Yeah.
So that's a great question for the third section. However, Trustee Duran did have a question, so let's take your question, and then we will slide right into the third question. Thank you.
It does have to do with data. And, you know, when we look at the dashboard, it's nice to see the colors that we see. You know, Albany, you guys are doing a great job. But there's, I always think, and you will know too, room for growth, and in particular with some of the subgroups. And in particular, when I think of equity and look at the subgroups, I get concerned. Because even though, for example, Albany could say, oh, all our kids are doing good, even the Latino kids are at above the standard, you know, in terms of points. But when you look at the comparison between their percentages and other students, there's a remarkable difference, anywhere from 16% to 39% in terms of the difference. And so that is a question about equity. And while you're going to struggle in this coming year just around physical stuff, have you had thoughts about how you're going to address those specific issues? And there's other subgroups as well.
May I just make one observation before you answer the question? The observation is in relation to overall, because this question came up, I think, a little bit yesterday in the board questions. Overall, from 2016-17 to 2017-18, all of our subgroups district-wide experienced a decline in performance in both English language arts and mathematics. And as I said in the board responses, we're not certain if, I don't know if that's an anomaly, and so we're sort of looking ahead to 18-19 to sort of see if that was just an off year. That's not a complete answer to your question about equity, I realize, but I sort of want to provide that context that across the district last year we experienced some declines in scores, with the exception of two student groups. One was our Hispanic Latino students in the area of English language arts, whose scores remained flat, and our students with disabilities in the area of mathematics, whose scores remained flat in general across the district. So that's not reflected in these individual site SIPSAs, but I do sort of want to surface that in general we are sort of pondering the scores this year as they relate to previous years, because in previous years there has been at least some nominal growth from one year to the next. But to your question of equity,
I think one of the things, if I understand your question correctly, because as three principals here, I think we've been reading this data for many years. So we recognize that many of the subgroups that either perform below standard or who struggle the most haven't changed much over time. Occasionally you see an anomaly, and that's one of the things we're looking at this year. Is this an anomaly? Are our scores across the district and at our sites this slight drop. Is this a trend that we're going to see, or is this something somewhat unique? The one that stood out for me and my staff was just even in the language arts for Ocean View, you see that our white students had a decline of 19.6 points. We're still in the green, but our white students declined. So what is that about? They would be the group you would anticipate. That would be one of the higher groups that we would be working towards. That being said, I think our adoption, one of the things that we're really excited about and worked really hard with the units of study adoption in reading is it gives us the opportunity to bring in literature that's rich in cultural stories, cultural struggles, and give kids a chance to see themselves in literature and in other places rather than just the same old stories that they've read year after year after year from the teachers. So it is one place I think where we can continue to dig deeper and bring representation into the classroom. I'm not sure if that answers your question, but one small attempt.
Yeah, I also want to be cognizant of time. I think it's an important question. I think that one thing that I've loved about Albany is that, you know, while we are generally a high-performing school district, and that is a privilege. It's a privilege to work here with, with a team of professionals who's really focused on educating children. But with that comes a responsibility. It feels like, you know, the way I talk to my teenagers these days is, if you want privileges, it's these are your responsibilities. But I feel like our staff here in Albany acknowledge the responsibility that comes with the privilege of working in this district that is so high performing, and that is that we focus our lens more on our subgroups that are not performing, and to have historically not been performing well, and doing what we can to address those achievement gaps. What Terry said about expanding our literature is a district-wide effort that we've been really well supported on in terms of purchasing books for our classroom libraries. Our staff first started talking about that at the Museum of Tolerance last February, when we were presented with statistics about the number of diverse characters in children's literature, and it's very, very, very small. So being mindful of that and supporting acquisitions to our classroom libraries that have more students of diverse backgrounds is something that we've been focused on as a staff, and something that's even been supported by our parent group at Marin, and so we continue to, focus our lens in that area. So, yeah.
I have so much to say. I think maybe just next question, and I'll try to weave it in there because it gets me a little fired up.
Yeah.
And so maybe the other thing I might say is in terms of how we plan moving forward to address performance gaps for students. Terry mentioned sort of the idea that the units of study in reading and writing provide an opportunity for us to introduce sort of literature that sort of serves as windows and mirrors for students. But I think the other thing that having a district-wide adopted curriculum does is guarantee all students access to the same curriculum, right? So where before maybe you were getting sort of the binder with the handwritten notes and then it sort of depended on the teacher that you had, sort of using the curriculum, right, provides the alignment that we've spoken to sort of a lot that will become really key moving forward. The other thing I would just say really briefly is that we've already started thinking about professional development topics for next year, and one of the conversations that we've been having with principals and also teachers on special assignment is that whatever the content we select, and we sort of have some ideas thinking about adoptions that are upcoming, whatever the content is, there must be sort of the element of thinking about equity and social justice, and we must begin to think about how the curriculum is enacted on students and how we continue to sort of really refine our practices around culturally relevant and responsive teaching. So this was some work that we started sort of really in earnest this year and plan to continue to keep that theme, sort of that underlying theme moving forward. And I'm really excited about doing that work with our principals and with our teachers moving forward. So I think we certainly do see that those gaps need to be addressed and want to think about system-wide what are the best ways to move forward. And then Rebecca, I'm going to give you the last word on this topic, and then I'm going to move us ahead to looking ahead to next year.
kind of related to curriculum, I wanted to point out some of the things that are happening as a result of the curriculum that we've chosen. And, you know, I will say that as a TSA and literacy coach, my lens is much more narrow than it is when I'm in my world as a classroom teacher. But the curriculum we've done really lends itself to equitable practices. One of the cornerstones of units of study, as we have it, is that students are practicing the reading with books that are at their level, which means they have access to texts that will help them to practice these high-level skills, even if perhaps their decoding and their reading ability is at a third grade, you know, a third grade text, but they can really practice these skills. Whereas in the past, if we had, you know, other forms where everybody's reading the same book, you know, the same story, it would be too high for some kids, too low for other kids, and, you know, maybe just right for 3 kids in a class. And so as a result of our instruction, we're really helping kids to develop the skills that they need and practice at an accessible level, which helps them move along faster. I think in addition, there's a really strong assessment component that goes beyond what shows up in the dashboard to the Fountas and Pinnell is what we've adopted as a reading assessment, which helps teachers give it 2 to 3 times a year. For most students, it helps us know and keep track of their progress as we go along so that we can adjust the books that we're giving to students to, again, help them progress. And I think the final component of that curriculum is it has a very strong conferring aspect. So teachers are meeting one-on-one with students very regularly, and we're getting assessment data that is certainly much softer. You know, it's hard to put on a spreadsheet, and yet it's, for me as a teacher, the most valuable assessment that I get about my students, because then I can target their instruction in the moment. If I see I have a group of students who have a need around comprehension, the next day, those students are going to be on the rug with me during independent reading so that I can make sure they get that, so that we don't get, you know, those huge gaps that show up on the dashboard. So those little interventions that we're doing on a daily basis really, I think, really address questions of equity. The other thing that we're doing that I think will have a huge impact on this equity is we are on the brink of, I hope, deciding on a phonics curriculum for kindergarten and first grade right now. Right now, we have kind of a patchwork. There's nothing that's been adopted, certainly in living memory, beyond a very basic program they use in kindergarten, which is great, but doesn't go far enough. So when we have this adopted and hopefully implemented next year, we're going to have that alignment of instruction across all 3 sites. It's going to be excellent basic first teaching that, again, will hopefully help prevent some of those gaps among our subgroups of students, and it will, and if they occur, as they will occur, you know, I'd love to say they won't, but by nature they will, but we'll have that information so early we can address them before they really become problems. And so I think then when these kindergartners show up in 3rd grade on our dashboard, we're going to really see some great progress in the coming years. So. Fountas and Pinnell. They're publishers that have been around for quite a while out of Ohio State, and I forget the other school, but very solid research on literacy instruction.
One thing that you said that really stood out. Oh, I gotta use this. I feel like I'm loud enough. One thing that you said that really stood out was talking about how, you know, if you see that some students aren't at the same kind of level as the other students, kind of, you know, jumping in there and figuring out. I just remember myself being in school, there were some people who, you know, read through and they were like exceptional, and then there were other students that were reading the same book and had no idea what was going on. So that makes sense. I guess my question, and I think you might have answered this, but I wanted to be more specific. If you provide students with work that's more kind of at the level where they are, then what is the kind of plan that goes into, catching them back up?
Great question. We're doing, I think, a few things. Because it's definitely true that if students are behind and we keep working them behind, they're never going to get caught up. I think one of the things that's happening on sites, and again, I can speak most clearly to Ocean View, is we're really working on giving those students extra instruction. And that reminds me of a part that I forgot to mention in terms of our intervention. Sometimes we have students, some of our specialists are pushing into classrooms. Sometimes they're pulling them out for reading instruction. And sometimes we're doing extra. At Ocean View, we use a program called Read Naturally for students who might be in the classroom or with the reading specialist during the reading hour. But then there's another portion of the day where they're spending a relatively short amount of time, less than half an hour, I think, for additional reading instruction on fluency and comprehension. And we've shown some excellent data. Other models have been pull-out instruction on simply decoding strategies because our reading specialist was noticing that was an area where students were having some trouble. So pulling a group, having very relatively short-term, really highly targeted instruction, and then putting them back, and we've had great success. And if I had a better memory, I would say what Sue's data was on that. But I think the bottom line is whenever possible, and this is one thing I would add if we had more money, finding ways to give kids more, like not just different and outside and instead, but giving them more to help them get caught up. So, thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. We did go a little over, but there were some really great questions, so wanted to spend some time there. So the final question is really asking our site principals to give you a little taste of what's to come, right? To sort of look into the future and sort of speak to how the conversations that they've shared with you about sort of how well the work went this year will influence the planning for next year. And so, Brian, your question was around sort of knowing the constraints, what will you do differently? So principals, as you're responding to this final question, if you might keep in mind Brian's question about sort of what changes you might anticipate making in terms of activities next year. And let's start with Heather.
Well, I think probably it's important to note that at Cornell, the significant revision is that we're trying not to revise it. So we're trying to maintain the things that we have in place. And I think that's a huge challenge for us because, for instance, teachers have written into our plans release time for assessment to collaborate, yet we're taking a 10% cut to our budget. So how will we maintain supplies, programming, materials, and the really essential days needed to provide release for the teachers? I think those are some of the big challenges. In thinking about, persistent achievement gaps, I think that one of the most important shifts we're trying to work towards is getting staff to really buy into, adopt, and implement an ideology that says, they're all of our kids, not just the kids that are with you. Or when this particular arises with a student, that child goes to the principal for discipline, or that child must go to the reading lab because they're 2 levels below. It really requires a shift in approach and thinking and mindset about the way that you approach the children. I also think one of the things that we're really trying to work on is labeling and being transparent about persistent achievement gaps, rather than saying something like you might have heard many years ago, well, it doesn't matter what color the child is. It doesn't matter. They'll all do well. No, actually, what the data suggests is that's not true. And so we have to be a bit more knock it over the head about saying, these kids need something different. And what will that be? So the big thing for us is to try to maintain what we have in our plan with less. I mean, and we really have to label that it's not just the sites taking cuts. We're going to have less support from the district office. It's significant to take two positions like student services and special ed and say, just put them together, no problem. I think it's a huge problem. We haven't heard about what's going to happen with personnel, yet you've heard a number of us talk about staffing gaps. So how will we take care of some of those things? Those are probably the areas I'm most concerned about for us. But I'm also excited about getting teams to work on some of these things. I think in terms of one of the big plans for us next year is try to figure out how to continue our training with culturally responsive teaching. Even though you can buy us materials, I would say that it has more to do with approach than it does with materials. You need the materials to implement your approach, but it's all in the nuance of the way that we address the kids in the classroom, the things we say and the things we do every day. So those are some of the challenges I anticipate. How will the plan be monitored is a big question for us at Cornell because we've had more people. You know, I've had a partner in crime, Misha, who is amazing. She is the most stellar instructional leader. And site principals are great instructional leaders too, but we wear many hats. And so while we wear many hats, we can usually only put a few on at one time. And so that is probably going to be one of the biggest pieces is how do we monitor the plan? And I think that is going to happen through our instructional leadership team taking on a larger role, us partnering in new ways. It's a wonderful opportunity, but it is going to be a challenge.
Yeah, so one thing that we're thinking about at Marin and have begun to talk about, and I'm excited about continuing to go deeper into next year, is how to work in service of our students who are struggling the most. And again, I know we've talked about it a lot, about systematizing our efforts and coming up with more alignment, but I think part of that is articulating a clear vision and a clear action plan when you have a set of circumstances in front of you. Our leadership team has worked a lot to identify how we're approaching, you know, various different aspects and gaps that we anticipate needing to fill. But one thing we've talked a lot about as well that's come up in relation to special education is multi-tiered systems of support. Marin has had a really fabulous intervention team who has worked really hard to support our students and understanding and being clear about articulating when it is the role of the general education teacher and what systems and supports are in place for students when they're not performing as well as we'd like them to, or what we believe their ability to be. And then at what point do we, you know, have an SST? At what point do we expect that certain interventions have happened in the classroom and we can say, yes, I've done X, Y, and Z, and now I'm looking for more. And then when it becomes the intervention team's role, and when they've done X, Y, and Z but are looking for more, and when it becomes special education's role to pick up the ball and run with it. I think that we have a well-running system at Marin, but I think that it could operate more efficiently and more clearly for everybody if we spent some time really articulating our vision of what our multi-tiered systems of support clearly look like for everyone, and in that addressing, you know, our you know, achievement gaps and calling out, you know, when we have students of color or students of unique differences, you know, how to support them in ways that work for them. But I think it starts with, you know, being clear about what we're doing, about what's not happening, and what else we need. So.
I think Heather hit it right on the head when she said, you know, at this point, writing site plans as long as we have, if we were making huge revisions, and there's been something wrong with our site plans in the past. So I think part of our challenge is maintaining as much as possible. We have two things coming at us at the same time at Ocean View. One is the district-wide or statewide budget cuts, and the other is basically creating two schools on two campuses. While one school moves for the fall, the other hopefully moves mid-year. And how do we maintain community? Within maintaining community, how do we continue to offer equitable practices without a TSA? with that change? How do we continue to provide strong and meaningful professional development? So I keep writing and looking at, I wrote down the challenges, equal opportunities. And with the challenge of not having a TSA, it provides us an opportunity to look inside our community and say who within our community can now be given what they need to offer professional development to their colleagues. Because many times we live across the hall and we talk as colleagues, but we really don't know the expertise our colleagues carry. So I'm hoping that the opportunity is there for us to pull together and rely on each other to share our best practices. So that's one of the things that I look forward to as far as how we're going to get those kinds of supports when we don't, when we're going to be living without them. I think the biggest revision we made was probably more related to community and how we sustain community. Some of the things that we have to let go of. So the thing we're most proud of is one of the things that's going to be impossible to hold on to in the same model, and that is with the opportunity for student input and student leadership, first grade through fifth grade, we're not going to have the same opportunity to do that. So what we do know with Rebecca in third grade, the fourth grade, and the fifth grade teachers who have really put together amazing assemblies and Otter Pop opportunities for kids to be recognized weekly, for them to be able to give and receive input. We're only going to be able to do that with our upper grades, third through fifth grade. We're not going to have the same opportunity in first through second. So that's one of the things that our revision is going to have to perhaps reflect.
So with the split schools and the split community and parents being disenfranchised by all they're being asked to do and another school to drop kids off on, and the budget cuts and people not being around, what do we do? So what we are looking at right now and talking about is how can we involve AMS students, how can we involve the high school students to help us, help our school. What opportunities, what classes, what credits can they be given to come in and tutor, to run a small group, to provide, we don't, we're not, once we get to the high school, we don't have a fenced-in yard. Unless we have this community, unless the high school students are, unless that community there is willing to come and support us, we're not going to be able to make this work. So I'm going to call it an opportunity too. I've always had EdSet students. I've always had students from the high school every year. It's been an amazing experience. And now, and lots of other kids have said, oh, I'd love to do that, but I can't get to you, over at Ocean View. Well, now you can get to us. So what I'm hoping we're going to be spending some time on and getting some communities and some buy-in is what kinds of supports can we build in for our older students now to help our younger students.
Alrighty, thank you very much, principals. Board, we have about 7 minutes left, and so I would invite you, if you have any final questions or closing comments, now would be the time for that.
I just wanted to close with two things. One, you guys are all working really hard, and we just appreciate it. And when we have like the high school students come in and speak at the board meetings or have conversations with the high school students that are board members, it shows that they made their way through the district and that the district served them well because they are sharp. And there was another opportunity I had to read comments from students, and again, they exceed all of my expectations. And so I just wanted to take a moment to, thank you for all your hard work. The one thing that kind of stood out to me a little bit, and you don't have to talk about it right now, we can talk about it another time, was that you talked about how you've been doing this for a long time, so a lot of things have remained the same and kind of keeping that the same. If we keep a lot of it the same, then it seems to me that it might be a little difficult to to close that gap if everything kind of remains the same, because then the gap will remain the same as well. So it seems like there has to be some type of break in the road in order to kind of bring those students up to where the higher performing students are. So, I mean, that would just be something to think about. Can't really answer that in 6 minutes, but those are my closing thoughts.
This is also maybe not something you can answer, but I think the theme of needing the infrastructure support to help or continue the work that you've done, having teachers and schools learn from each other, as well as this challenge of the students being all over the place. I do think it would be helpful at some point to hear, money is an object, but to hear sort of ideas for what could we be doing to facilitate that, because you know, that may involve other organizations, or but I think, you know, with the parents, we've been talking a lot about how this opportunity of the split schools offers a potential sort of revisiting of what does it mean to have all these PTAs, for example, or how do we build something that's more across the district. And it sounds like there's a lot of work to build on with that, so it would be helpful to continue the conversation about what we could do. I mean, I don't know, there are a lot of players here, but what could happen to try to make up for some of what you're losing in supporting that infrastructure, and to try to think creatively about it. Because it is a great opportunity, but it is a really big challenge, which I think we all recognize.
I just wanted to echo the thanks to all of your work, and I wanted to thank Marie for setting up this kind of template for the single plans, because I think this was really useful, and I think that and, you know, and our organization here allowed us to get a more in-depth look at how these schools look on the ground and how they're operating on a day-to-day basis. So I feel like this is the best work study we've had so far. You know, there's a lot of great positive news, and then there's some really significant challenges. But I think I've heard some good ideas tonight, and I echo Sarah. Anything that the board can do to help you execute those ideas, we'd be interested in hearing. Can I just say one thing real quick?
Before we say goodbye, I feel like I really need to be able to thank Heather and Melissa, because they're taking our kindergartners. And we talked a lot about 1st through 5th grade at Ocean View and what we're doing, moving to 2 sites. But these guys are doing a lot of work to take care of our incoming kindergartners. And what we're beginning to really feel is we're going to miss our teachers for a few years. And they're amazing teachers, so I know they're going to be welcomed, and they're really going to have a great time and really be very successful there. But I felt like having this conversation without thanking them for doing that would be a little incomplete. So thank you, guys.
Okay, thank you so very much, principals and Rebecca, for being here, and board for your attention. So just as sort of a final technical piece, the single school plans, as they are now called, will be on the consent agenda at the May 28th board meeting. There were some typos and grammatical things that we need to fix up, and so we will fix those and present those to you for your potential approval on the 28th. And then also on the 28th, we will have this conversation again with the principal of the middle school, the principal of the high school, and the principal of our continuation school. So we look forward to having this conversation with secondary, and thank you very much, Kim, for your kind words about the organization and structure. And if there's any feedback that you all have as board members around how we might sort of improve this facilitated conversation, I would certainly welcome that, short of 2 hours, which sounds good in theory. You know, we really wanted to be able to give the principals an opportunity to really sort of surface and highlight their successes, and also sort of speak to the challenges that they're really feeling as we look ahead to next year. And again, great opportunities and look forward to all that that has in store. So with that, I will say thank you. And may I conclude our work study, or would you like to do that?
Actually, the board will need to go back up to the dais and then conclude. But I do want to make one final comment. When I hear people talk about what a school district is, what a school district is not, this is not a district of schools. This is a school district, and it's because of this leadership. Right? I always say from the boardroom to the classroom, we have to take on leadership to work together. And given the situation that we're in, especially with the move, I have to commend you folks. No one ever sees the work that you guys do. I know I'm in your classrooms, but the amount of work that you guys have put together throughout this year to do what you're doing and focusing on kids and their achievement while we're in this move is absolutely phenomenal. So I do want to thank you.
We'll move up to the dais to adjourn the special meeting, and we'll immediately all then adjourn. Then we'll convene the regular meeting. Adjourn, convene, adjourn.